Welcome to First Cup of Tea. Let's talk about politics in video games. It's common for video game companies, Ubisoft, to argue that their games are not political. But when you make a game that uses the imagery from a very contemporary political movement, that's a pretty hard argument to make. When you make a game about surveillance culture, that's a pretty hard argument to make. When you make a game that has this...
And with no police to protect you, did you own a gun?
Did your neighbor?
Some survived.
In its opening movie, that's a pretty hard argument to make. Just so you don't think I'm picking on Ubisoft, I'm going to argue that pretty much almost all games have a political element. At least all games that have any form of story, and even some that don't. If you make a game that's about the militarized police force in a first-person shooter, well, that's making a political statement. Even if you just make a game about military people fighting other military people, that's making a statement. That statement might be a very status quo statement, but there's a statement nonetheless. If you make a game where a group of people fleeing a dangerous situation travel to a distant land to try to find a place to be safe, well, I mean, that could be one of two messages. That could be a refugee story, or that could be a colonialism story. Or it could, unfortunately, kind of thread the needle between those two stories and not really address either of those things. I think when companies are saying it's not about politics, what they're saying is actually, in a lot of ways, way worse than them saying, yes, we actually oppose Black Lives Matter, or yes, we believe in no gun control. Because when they're saying that, assuming it's not just a straight out lie, is they don't mean it's not about politics. They mean we're not trying to make a political statement. We're just making one as a side effect of cynically grasping on to topical conversations in order to get more attention in our marketing. And isn't that so much worse than the company just coming out and taking a stance about something? And even in that action, they're making a political statement. In addition to the cynical, opportunistic one that's coming out of them exploiting a piece of current events, they're also making a statement that a corporation should be able to do or say anything it wants as long as it's in service to making more money, to selling more product. For me, the reason I say that most games are making a political statement of some sort, at least most games have any form of setting or story, is because even if you're not evoking Black Lives Matter, or even if you're not celebrating the military-industrial complex, you still have people in your game doing things in a setting. If that setting is modern, and you steer as hard as you can away from any sort of examination of modern events, then the statement that you're making is one in support of the status quo, which is a statement all on its own. Again, you may not be making that statement on purpose, but you are making that statement. There are two unfortunate statements that I think a lot of games make, not exactly by accident, but almost because of the way that we build games and the way that we tell stories. The first is one that pushes a lot of conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are a trope that's often used in the narrative format because they give you a hook that allows your protagonist to push against. It makes sense that nobody believes them. It explains why the protagonist, someone relatively weak at the beginning of the game, has to act alone as opposed to stronger, more competent organizations stepping in and solving the problem. It gives you a nice arc. But while I'm not going to argue that conspiracy theories in video games and movies are responsible for some of the things we're seeing today, they've definitely added fertilizer to the conversation. They've definitely normalized the idea that conspiracy theories are just a thing that exists, a thing that happens. So I think that we need to think about setting that trope trope aside, at least for now, until we can normalize people's belief in real things. Conspiracy theories simply do not occur at the frequency or competency that they are presented in media. And I think until we all have a firmer grasp on that fact, this is a message, a trope that we need to use a lot less. The other one, and I think the harder one to address, is this reliance on the sort of strong link theory or the exceptional person belief. I think we live in a world, at least in the West, where we've lost a lot of our community, our interconnectivity, and we've become very independent and very willing to put our faith into single great leaders, whether that be political or someone that is some sort of technocrat. A community isn't the many connections of many different people to a single strong central figure. A community is a web. It is the connection between many people and many other people. It's the willingness of those many people to interact with and help the other people around them. It's a web, not a bicycle wheel. And that's not to say that some people won't be connected to a lot more people than others. It's just that when you have a single point of connection for an entire community, then that is controlled through that single point and you have a single point of failure. Instead, you want interconnectivity. Okay, I'm probably going on way too long on this particular topic, but I'll pre-address one criticism that could be leveled at the points I'm making here. You could say, well, weren't you a leader? Didn't you lead projects? And I did. So I was one of those people where a lot of connections met. But for me, the way that I led is I want there to be connections outside of my control. I want there to be decisions being made outside of my direct influence, both because it was less work for me, but also because it leads to a stronger team. But this single, strong, special person is prevalent in a lot of media. You see it all over the place. But in video games, it's really prevalent because video games are about you, the player, taking actions. So it's almost a necessity that you be an exceptional being in the world, at least for most kinds of games that exist, because that's just how you're going to structure the game. But I'm not convinced that this is a healthy thing for us to be constantly seeing in media. And when I say media, I mean everything. I've used this example on Twitter, but I'm going to use it again here. Let me describe the show to you. It's a single person who uses technological gadgets and a small group of companions to support and keep safe a community led by incompetent or corrupt political officials. They are not a member of a government. They are outside of any oversight, and they do what needs to be done. And they're seen as being heroes. And what am I describing here? Well, I could be describing lots of things, but I'm actually describing the kids show Paw Patrol, which presents this same very strong, exceptional person narrative, this exceptionalism that I think we've seen increasingly take root. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have strong, exceptional people, but a functioning society needs the interactions of many different groups, many different people. It's not about a few billionaires fixing everything. It's not about no one else having to take action while a few fix it all. We all have responsibility for our own actions, but we also have a responsibility to hold those in power to be better, to do better. I think that when we embrace this exceptionalism narrative too strongly, then we let those people that have power do whatever they want, because it's almost like they must know better, right? Because they are these exceptional beings. But we have a responsibility, we have a a right to hold people in positions of power, positions of authority, to task and expect more from them. I think when times are easy, it's easy to see the exceptionalism of the few. But when times are hard, that's actually when we need everyone to pull together and not just rely on a few exceptional individuals. This message, this totemization, this worship of exceptional beings, I think is a really hard one to tackle. While I do think that we're getting too much of it in our entertainment, I'm not entirely sure what to do about it in games because, like I said, you're the player, you should have agency, you should affect the world. So it's hard to come up immediately with ways that you can focus on the group, focus on a society as a whole, while maintaining that player agency. I think it can be done. I do think that role-playing games that have a party, like the BioWare games, do at least move from one to many, not an entire village even, but at least a few more than one. It's something to think about. I honestly don't have an immediate solution to it. As I was making this video, I realized there was actually one more thing that I wanted to tackle that I feel needs to be considered in your messaging. In an effort to avoid some of these other political stances that the development team disagrees with, there can be a tendency to try to show both sides of a situation, to humanize the villain, to present both sides of an issue. This is good because it gives the player the ability to see both sides, and in a role-playing game, it possibly gives them the ability to choose between these different opportunities. But this can start to set this expectation that all issues have two sides, that all conversations need two voices. And honestly, that's not always true. I was actually kind of thinking for a while that we were going to get all the way through this without me calling Dragon Age out on the carpet, but here we go. In Dragon Age 2, through kind of a, let's say, fluke or misstep of the development process, you always end up in a situation where the mages turn to blood magic and the city descends into chaos. Well, that's really, I think, in an effort to be balanced in that game, we are kind of giving voice to this oppressive narrative, and that's probably inappropriate in retrospect. Indeed, in the act of trying to show both sides, because of the way the game ends, we actually end up leaning towards the Templar side of the argument, because we show that their reasons for why mages need to be controlled are all true. And that wasn't the point, that wasn't the goal, but that ends up being the message that ends up being there, just because the ending ends up undermining the pro-mage side of the argument. I'm trying to circle towards a conclusion here. When you present both sides of an argument as if they are valid and on equal footing, in some cases what you're doing is you are elevating an argument that doesn't deserve to be elevated. And you are presenting two sides of something that really only has one side, as if there's any legitimacy to the other side. And I think when we do that, when we try to present balance, we have to be careful that we're not doing that. I think in most cases, we do want to do this. We do want to humanize our villains and try to understand their motivations so that they aren't just cartoon characters. But I think you still want to know clearly that the villain is the bad guy. You don't really want the player to be thinking, you know, actually, I think I kind of am on his side, because I think you've done your job too well in that case. So I'm struggling with this one. BioWare definitely tries to present both sides of a lot of things, and I feel like that's the right way to approach this. But I'm wondering if it's being taken too far sometimes, and that sometimes there just aren't two sides. To summarize, if your game has a story or a setting, it's got politics in it. So maybe think about what that political message is that you're sending and whether or not it's what you want to be sending. Because if you're not thinking about that, you're still sending some sort of message, and it might not be what you mean. And maybe we can start leaning away from a few of the common messages in games. Messages about exceptional individuals against the world, stories that involve lots of conspiracy theories, and giving voice to two sides of an issue when maybe there's only one that deserves a voice. Hopefully this was interesting to you and not that controversial. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources necessary to keep this channel running. If you are interested in becoming a member, there's a link down in the description. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. That will tell the YouTube algorithm that other people might find use out of it as well, which will help spread it to more people. I will see you again soon. Thank you.